My name is David Mattson. I worked as a wildlife researcher with the National Park Service and U.S. Geological Survey until I retired in 2013. But along the way, I also taught various classes at university, including places like Yale and MIT very briefly. But my roots go back to South Dakota, which is where I grew up, the western part of the state. And as a kid, I spent as much time as I possibly could out in the woods, what might have passed for wilderness in that part of the world at that time. But then that naturally led me to be fascinated with maps, and specifically those places on the map that were still blank, where there were no roads, there were no human settlements, no sign of humanity. And that then, by hook and by crook and by a fairly circuitous route, led me to Yellowstone Park, where, when I was still fairly young, I got involved with research focused on grizzly bear behavior. I loved working in Yellowstone with grizzly bears. I loved being in wild places, mixing it up with wild animals. But as much as anything, I loved following grizzly bears around because they were a window into an entire world, watching what they did, trying to understand why it was they did what they did, and even more than that, trying to upload the mystery of how these animals actually were able to survive. And so it's through the grizzly bears, for example, that I learned everything basically I know about edible plants, and led me to eat earthworms and ants, among many other things. So having that real personal connection, not only with bears generically, but with individual bears, and realizing that these are indeed individuals with personalities. But after scratching that itch for about 10 years and being increasingly witness to what I consider to be the misuse of science in official decision-making processes related to grizzly bears, I got increasingly interested in relations between science and policy, which is what I focused on in my university level teaching. But since then, I've been particularly interested in producing relevant science, or relevant synopses of science, to help foster better public understanding of grizzly bears, but also to support better decision-making outcomes. As much as I'm passionate about wilderness and grizzly bears as tokens of wilderness, if nothing else, I'm also passionate about the integrity with which science is used in decision-making. And unfortunately, what I've seen is many instances of misuse, including most recently the misapplication, distortion of science by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to remove Endangered Species Act protections for Yellowstone grizzly bears. And so in support of litigation by Native peoples, the tribes, environmental groups, we were actually able to reverse that Fish and Wildlife Service decision, which is why Yellowstone grizzly bears continue to have ESA protections. One of the projects that I'm involved with now is with my wife, Louisa Wilcox, an endeavor called Grizzly Times. And it's a portal through which we try to provide the public with information relevant to grizzly bear conservation. So I guess in the end, what I would hope as an outcome of all the stuff that I'm involved in right now with grizzly bears is that not only that you, the listener, be better informed about grizzly bears, have your curiosity satisfied in perhaps some small way, but that you would be motivated to do things that matter in support of grizzly bear conservation, which really is rooted in whether you care or not. And that's where I hope you would end up, by learning more about bears and by learning more about what's going on with bears, that you, the audience, end up caring more.